Suppressed from the world: ocean acidification. This is a special series of news and events that have been suppressed from the world, the public, and removed from websites. We ask you keep an open mind and do some investigation for yourself. The events are part of the pattern. Sometime later we will talk about the pattern and how it will change the world. Now ask yourself, why they don't want you to know. Our oceans are acidifying even if the nightly news hasn't told you yet. As humanity continues to fill the atmosphere with harmful gases, the planet is becoming less hospitable to life as we know it. The vast oceans absorb much of the carbon dioxide we have produced, from the Industrial Revolution through the rise of global capitalism. Earth's self-sacrifice spared the atmosphere nearly 25% of humanity's CO2 emissions, slowing the onslaught of many severe weather consequences. Although the news media have increasingly covered the climate weirding of global warming, hurricane superstorms, fierce tornado clusters, overwhelming snowstorms and record-setting global high temperatures, our ocean's peril has largely stayed submerged below the biggest news stories. The rising carbon dioxide in our oceans burns up and deforms the smallest, most abundant food at the bottom of the deep blue food chain. One vulnerable population is the tiny shelled swimmer known as the sea butterfly. In a few short decades, the death and deformation of this fragile and translucent species could endanger predators all along the oceanic food web, scientists warn. This butterfly effect, once unleashed, potentially threatens fisheries that feed more than 1 billion people worldwide. Since ancient times, humans fished the oceans for food. Now, we're frying ocean life before we even catch it, starving future generations in the process. Largely left out of national news coverage, this dire report was brought to light by a handful of independent-minded journalists. Craig Welch from the Seattle Times, Julia Whitty of Mother Jones and Eli Kintish of Science Now News. It is also the top story of Project Censored, an annual book and reporting project that features the year's most underreported news stories, striving to unmask censorship, self-censorship, and propaganda in corporate-controlled media outlets. Information is the currency of democracy, Ralph Nader, the prominent consumer advocate and many-time presidential candidate, wrote in his foreword to this year's Project Censored 2015. But with most mass media owned by narrow corporate interests, the general public remains uninformed. Whereas the mainstream media poke and peck at noteworthy events at single points in time, often devoid of historical context or analysis, Project Censored seeks to clarify understanding of real-world issues and focus on what's important. Context is key, and many of its top censored stories highlight deeply entrenched policy issues that require more explanation than a simple soundbite can provide. Campus and faculty from more than 24 colleges and universities join in this ongoing effort, headquartered at Sonoma State University in California. There are 260 students and 49 faculty who vet thousands of news stories on select criteria: importance, timeliness, quality of sources and the level of corporate news coverage. The top 25 finalists are sent to Project Censored's panel of judges, who then rank the entries, with ocean acidification topping this year's list. There are outlets, regular daily papers, who are independent and they're out there, Andy Lee Roth, Associate Director of Project Censored, said. Too many news outlets are beholden to corporate interests, but Welch of the Seattle Times bucked the trend, Roth said, by writing some of the deepest coverage yet on ocean acidification. There are reporters doing the highest quality of work, as evidenced by being included in our list, Roth said. But the challenge is reaching as big an audience as the story should. Indeed, though Welch's story was reported in the Seattle Times, a mid-sized daily newspaper, this warning is relevant to the entire world. To understand the impact of ocean acidification, Welch asks readers to imagine every person on Earth tossing a hunk of CO2 as heavy as a bowling ball into the sea. That's what we do to the oceans every day. Computer modeler Isaac Kaplan, at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Office in Seattle, told Welch that his early work predicts significant declines in sharks, skates, and rays, some types of flounder and sole and Pacific whiting, the most frequently caught commercial fish off the coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. Acidification may also harm fisheries in the farthest corners of the Earth. A study by the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program outlines acidification's threat to the Arctic food chain. Decreases in seawater pH of about 0.02 per decade have been observed since the late 1960s in the Iceland and Barents Seas, the study's authors wrote in the executive summary. And destroying fisheries means wiping out the livelihoods of the native peoples of the Antarctic. Acidification can even rewire the brains of fish, Welch's story demonstrated. Studies found rising CO2 levels cause clownfish to gain athleticism, but have their sense of smell redirected. This transforms them into dumb jocks, scientists said, swimming faster and more vigorously straight into the mouths of their predators. These Frankenstein fish were found to be 5 times more likely to die in the natural world. What a fitting metaphor for humanity, as our outsized consumption propels us toward an equally dangerous fate. It's not as dramatic as, say, an asteroid is hitting us from outer space, Roth said of this slowly unfolding disaster, which is likely why such a looming threat to our food chain escapes much mainstream news coverage. Journalism tends to be more action-focused, Roth said, looking to define conflict in everything it sees. A recently top-featured story on CNN focused on President Barack Obama's awkward coffee cup salute to a Marine, which ranks only slightly below around-the-clock coverage of the president's ugly tan suit as a low point in mainstream media's focus on the trivial. Now that Trump's in office, will we hear about the oceans? We don't think we will. As Nader noted, important stories are often viewed as dull by reporters and therefore unworthy of coverage. But mainstream media do cover some serious topics with weight, as they did in the wake of the police officer shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. So what's the deciding factor? As Roth tells it, corporate news focuses on drama, and the most dramatic action is, of course, violence. But the changes caused by ocean acidification are gradual. Sea butterflies are among the most abundant creatures in our oceans, and are increasingly born with shells that look like cauliflower or sandpaper, making this and similar species more susceptible to infection and predators. Ocean acidification is changing the chemistry of the world's water faster than ever before and faster than the world's leading scientists predicted, Welch said, but it's not getting the attention it deserves. Combined nationwide spending on acidification research for 8 federal agencies, including grants to university scientists by the National Science Foundation, totals about $30 million a year, less than the annual budget for the coastal Washington city of Hoquiam, population 10,000. Our oceans may slowly cook our food chain into new forms with potentially catastrophic consequences. Certainly 20 years from now, when communities around the world lose their main source of sustenance, the news will catch on. But will the problem make the front page tomorrow, while there's still time to act? In Sydney, Australia, scientists surveying the Great Barrier Reef said Tuesday that it had suffered the worst coral die-off ever recorded after being bathed this year in warm waters that bleached and then weakened the coral. About 2/3 of the shallow water coral on the reef's previously pristine, 430-mile northern stretch is dead, the scientists said. Only a cyclone that reduced water temperatures by up to 3 degrees Celsius in the south saved the lower reaches of the 1,400-mile reef from damage, they added. On some atolls in the north, all the coral has died, said Professor Terry Hughes, the director of the ARC Center of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University in Townsville, in the eastern state of Queensland. Professor Hughes and a team of scientists drew their findings from about 900 dive surveys along the length of the reef in October and November. The good news is that in the south, only about 1% of the reef's coral has died, and the mortality rate in the middle is about 6%, Professor Hughes said. Vibrant color has returned to that coral, and the reef there is in good condition, he added. But in the north, mortality rates are very high, and in some places where coral has survived but it has weakened, the per capita predation rate has gone through the roof, he said. Masses of Drupella snails could be seen swarming around and eating the remaining healthy coral, he said. The bleaching was the third such event known to strike the reef, which extends along almost the entire eastern coast of Queensland and is listed as a Natural World Heritage Site by the United Nations. Stephen Miles, Queensland's Environment Minister, called the bleaching a tragedy. In the north we have a very high coral death rate, Mr. Miles said at a news conference in Brisbane, the state capital. The tragedy of this is that the northern sections were the sections least impacted by human impacts, and to see those sections, 2/3 of the northern section, dead is catastrophic. However, he said, the reef is a very big system, and the mortality rate varies substantially. Mr. Miles and the Federal Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg, who also oversees energy policy in Australia, said Friday that $45 million Australian dollars, about $33.6 million, would be provided to improve water quality and reduce sediment runoff. That announcement precedes a government report, due to be submitted to the United Nations by Thursday, on the health of the reef and the government's management of threats to it. In May 2015 the United Nations stopped short of putting the reef on an endanger list, but it warned that climate change, water pollution and the effects of coastal development were all detrimental. We mostly can't see it around us, and too few of us seem to care, but nonetheless, scientists are increasingly convinced that the world is barreling towards what has been called a sixth mass extinction event. Simply put, species are going extinct at a rate that far exceeds what you would expect to see naturally, as a result of a major perturbation to the system. In this case, the perturbation is us rather than, say, an asteroid. As such, you might expect to see some patterns to extinctions that reflect our particular way of causing ecological destruction. And indeed, a new study published Wednesday in Science magazine confirms this. For the world's oceans, it finds, threats of extinction aren't apportioned equally among all species, rather, the larger ones, in terms of body size and mass, are uniquely imperiled right now. From sharks to whales, giant clams, sea turtles, and tuna, the disproportionate threat to larger marine organisms reflects the unique human propensity to cull the largest members of a population, the authors write. What to us was surprising was that we did not see a similar kind of pattern in any of the previous mass extinction events that we studied, said geoscientist Jonathan Payne of Stanford University, the study's lead author. So that indicated that there really is no good ecological analog. This pattern has not happened before in the 500 million years of the animal fossil record. The researchers conducted the work through a statistical analysis of 2,497 different marine animal groups at one taxonomic level higher than the level of species called genera. And they found that increases in an organism's body size were strongly linked to an increased risk of extinction in the present period, but that this was not the case in the Earth's distant past. Indeed, during the past 66 million years, there was actually a small link between smaller body sizes and going extinct, marking the present as a strong reversal. The extreme bias against large-bodied animals distinguishes the modern diversity crisis from all potential deep-time analogues, the researchers write. The study also notes that on land, we've already seen the same pattern, and in fact, we saw it first. Human hunting has been extensive for many thousands of years on land, whereas it's been extensive for a couple of hundred years in the oceans, says Payne. Thus, humans already drove to extinction many land-based large animal species in what has been dubbed the late Quaternary extinction event as the most recent ice age came to a close. These losses in the ocean are paralleling what humans did to land animals some 50,000 to 10,000 years ago, when we wiped out around half of the big-bodied mammal species on Earth, like mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and the like, said Anthony Barnosky, executive director of Stanford Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, who was not involved in the study but reviewed it for the Post. As a result, terrestrial ecosystems were locked into a new trajectory that included local biodiversity loss over and above the loss of the large animals themselves, and changes in which kinds of plants dominated. Barnosky was the co-author of a study published last year that found an exceptionally rapid loss of biodiversity over the last few centuries, indicating that a sixth mass extinction is already underway. A particular problem, says Payne, is that if you take out all the top predators, then the species they use to prey upon can run amok and explode in population, having large reverberating effects on the entire ecosystem. The preferential removal of the largest animals from the modern oceans, unprecedented in the history of animal life, may disrupt ecosystems for millions of years even at levels of taxonomic loss far below those of previous mass extinctions, the authors write. Interestingly, if climate change was the key driver of species losses, you'd expect to see a more evenly distributed set of risks to organisms. I've worked on the Permian mass extinction quite a bit. It shows environmental evidence of ocean warming, ocean acidification, and deoxygenation, the loss of oxygen from seawater, says Payne. These are the very same threats to the oceans that we're worried about now due to ongoing climate change. But the Permian extinction, some 250 million years ago, did not feature a selective disappearance of large-bodied organisms, Payne says. Thus, as previous work has also suggested, the current study underscores that ecosystem risks are not being principally driven by a changing climate yet. Rather, they're being driven more directly by which species humans hunt and fish, and where they destroy ecosystems to build homes, farms, cities, and much more. But as climate change worsens, it will compound what's already happening. The losses the authors describe in the oceans do not include the extinctions expected from business-as-usual climate change, said Barnosky. Adding those human-triggered losses onto those we're already causing from overfishing, pollution, and so on is very likely to put the human race in the same class as an asteroid strike like the one that killed the dinosaurs as an extinction driver. The study emerges even as the U.S. State Department prepares to open its third annual Our Ocean Conference, where heads of state and ocean advocates convene to try to protect more and more of the ocean's area from overfishing and other forms of despoilment, and climate change. The study should only heighten the focus at that event. But Payne says that, in a way, the research is heartening for those who care about ocean conservation precisely because human-driven large animal extinctions in the sea are not as advanced as they are on land. There is still a huge amount of biological life that we can save. I talked to a couple of people who said they found this a very discouraging result, Payne says. I tend not to look at it that way. I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the oceans, because we haven't impacted them much yet. Can we save the oceans of the world? Stay paranoid, my friends.